Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here. In this video, we've got a ton of news. We're talking about PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Nintendo Switch emulating the Nintendo Switch. We're also talking about Samsung getting bloated and a whole lot more. Let's get started. Alright, we'll kick things off here talking about PlayStation Vita emulation on Android with Vita3k. We've finally got an official release date, so set your calendars for Sunday. So MacDo, the main person behind Vita3k on Android, says the Vita3k Android version will release publicly next Sunday at 11 a.m. UTC+1. There's a link here and I'll drop it in the description below. If you click on it, it'll show you exactly what that time is in your local time zone, unless you're using a VPN. MacDo also says Vita3k is still an experimental emulator, and this is the first release, so don't be surprised if the emulator crashes when trying some games. It will only improve over time, so be patient. And the minimum requirements here: ARM64 device with Vulkan 1.0 support, Android 7 Plus. If you've got a 32-bit device, it's not going to be supported and probably will never be supported. You're going to need a 64-bit device. This is not a light emulator. On top of that, he says the recommended requirements are going to be updated, but if your device only has the minimum requirements, don't expect to be able to run anything more than some homebrews and 2D games. So at a high level here, and some people are not going to like me saying this, Vita3k is going to be similar to Aether SX2 and Skyline, meaning you're probably going to need a fairly powerful CPU in order to enjoy this emulator to its fullest potential. Snapdragon is going to be better than Mali, and you will be able to use custom drivers if you do have a Snapdragon CPU. On top of that, the Android version will not be open sourced for the first little bit, so if you see a fork of it, it's 100% fake. There's only going to be one version of Vita3k on Android to start out. But moving on, and next up we're talking about another big update, and this time with BigPEmu, Atari Jaguar emulation. BigPEmu version 1.05 just released, and Atari Jaguar CD is now supported. In addition to that, BigPEmu version 1.05 brings about a whole bunch of bug fixes and improvements. If you are curious about this one, BigPEmu is 100% free, so I'll drop a link to it in the description below and feel free to check it out. Moving on, and we're talking about Sega Dreamcast emulation with WashingtonDC, and WashingtonDC is officially changing its name to WashDC. It's also changing from GitHub to GitLab. It's still free, it's still open source, just changing names and locations. As always, I'll include links to everything in the description below. My news is open source, so go feel free to check it out. On top of that, feel free to check out this article. Snickerbockers wrote it on why they're migrating from GitHub to GitLabs. It surrounds Copilot, which is the AI from Microsoft that's been accused of stealing a whole bunch of open source and even copyrighted code. Next up, we're talking about Nintendo DS emulation on Android with DrasticDS, and DrasticDS just got a brand new update. So in this new version of DrasticDS, and no, it's not open source just yet, there are some major Android storage improvements. They fixed the save file initialization, they fixed fog in Pokemon Black and White, they fixed crashing in Love Plus, and also fixed sprite glitches in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Next up, we're talking about N64 emulation with Project 64, and you might not believe this, but it looks like Project 64 is headed to Android. At this point in time, it's not currently on the Google Play Store, but from my understanding, it's going to eventually be there. They're currently working on Android-related things, and I can't wait to see this one hit the Google Play Store. Moving on, and we're still talking about N64 emulation, but switching over to Rosalie's Mupen GUI, or RMG for short. RMG version 0.3.2 just released. We've got a whole bunch of bug fixes. It's free, it's open source, it's available on PC, and I recommend checking it out. I'll drop a link in the description below. And speaking about fixes, next up we're talking about PlayStation 3 emulation with RPCS3. And RPCS3 has just fixed some bugs in Metal Gear Solid 4 and GTA 5. And these were thanks to improving surface and texture cache communication. On the left is before, and on the right is after. At the time of filming, the latest build of RPCS3 is version 0.0.26-14687. If you haven't updated RPCS3 in a while, you might want to check out the latest build. I'll drop a link in the description below. And speaking about latest versions, or not latest versions at all, next up we're talking about PlayStation 2 emulation with PCSX2. PCSX2 says, better late than never, our Q1 2022 progress report is finally available. Just about a year late. In the event that you are curious about this one and wanted to check it out, I'll drop a link to the progress report in the description below. I do recommend giving it a read. It's well written and very entertaining, although it might be a little bit outdated. But moving on, and we're talking about Nintendo Switch emulation on PC with Ryujinx, and Ryujinx has a few updates. Version 1.1.601 has just released, and it fixes AMD graphics cards crashing on non-native resolutions in Fire Emblem Engage, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Pokemon Sword and Shield, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, Splatoon 3, Yu-Gi-Oh, and possibly other games. It also fixes low performance on AMD GPUs in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and possibly other games. And next up, we're still talking about Switch emulation, but switching over to Android and talking about Skyline. And Skyline got yet more updates today. Version 1836 and 1837 have just released. If you're currently using Skyline, you might want to check out the latest build. Someone has Hyper Light Drifter up and running at a solid 60 frames per second. The latest build does incorporate some previous Skyline Edge updates as well, so you might want to check this one out if you're looking for the best performance and optimizations on the free open source version. Next up, this one is wild. We're still talking about Nintendo Switch emulation, but on the Nintendo Switch. Someone has the ARM version of Yuzu up and running on an actual Nintendo Switch. Completely crazy, and they're getting between 10 to 20 frames per second in Super Mario Odyssey. If you are curious about this Switchception, I'll drop links to everything in the description below, the post on Reddit, and also right here on GitHub. Super interesting, super crazy, and I guess kind of impressive. Last up, and most certainly not least, at least not in the terms of size, we're talking about the Samsung Galaxy S23. The base install of Android, including everything for Samsung in here, is a whopping 60 gigabytes. Absolutely insane on these devices. Just for reference here, the operating system on my Pixel 7 is about 15 gigs overall, a fraction of this size. There is a whole lot of bloat apparently on this brand new Galaxy S23, and to me it's a little bit concerning. If it was me looking for a new cell phone, I'd probably be looking elsewhere. I'm not a big fan of bloat. And although the Galaxy S23 is a flagship device with a great CPU and arguably great cameras as well, 60 gigs is a lot for me to stomach just for the OS alone. To just take a second to put that into perspective, Windows 11 needs about 30 gigs on a base install. With updates and stuff, it obviously takes up more. And my current OS on my computer is Pop! OS, and that takes up between 15 to 20 give or take. Absolutely ridiculous that Android needs 60 gigs on a Samsung Galaxy S23. I don't know what's going on there, but whatever it is, I don't like it. But anyways, that is all I've got for you in this one. Straight to the point, all stuff and no fluff. We talked about a ton today. Let me know your thoughts about absolutely any of it in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button, check out my other videos. Don't tempt fate, save your state.